This video is to demonstrate how to solder the Raspberry Pi Pico or Pico 2 to the Pico Debug Carrier. The Pico Debug Carrier is another PCB with the RP2040 microcontroller, which can act as a debugger for the SWD interface on your regular Raspberry Pi Pico or Pico 2. You can also use jumper wires to connect the two MCUs together, but I decided to make an PCB so that I can just solder onto it and there won't be a mess of wires to deal with. This Pico 2 is actually taken from another project. As you can see, I've accidentally broke the boot cell button, but that's okay because we can upload code to the Pico with SWD on the Pico Debug Carrier, so that I don't need to press boot cell every time and I don't need to replug the board to my computer every time. The first thing you want to do is to put on the pin headers to the Pico, and it's going to be in the opposite direction to what's on the normal Picos you see. So the pin header is facing upwards, then you want to drop it in the footprint on the Pico Debug Carrier like this. Now I'm using 12mm pin headers, which is the most common ones, and as you can see, it leaves almost no protrusion on the other side, so it's a bit hard to solder. So I decided to make this video to show you how to do it so that you can actually solder the pin headers on. Okay, so first we want to solder one of the pins on the debug header to the PCB. Just pick any one of them. Alright. Then you want to make sure that the Pico is firmly pressed onto the PCB. Try to leave as little space between the two boards as possible. Right. So once you finish the first pin, and make sure the board is firmly pressed together, as you can see, to have as little space in between as possible, then we can proceed on to soldering the next two pins. Alright, next you will want to flip the board over and solder on the pins of the pin headers. And as you can see, we have very little protrusion for us to work with, but that's alright. If you first apply some flux, if you cover it in flux, it will be easy. Just make sure you apply some flux onto the pin headers so that the solder will stick to it. Alright. We have all of the pin headers soldered. It's not perfect, but it will work. We have connection between the pad and the pin. Right, now flip back to the front side. We need to solder on these SMD pads. Again, applying some flux will help. Now you need to be careful with the components beside the pads. This capacitor is actually quite close, and I have an overly large soldering iron for this, but I have to work with it. Okay, now we're done. Just inspect that all of the connections are being made. It looks pretty good to me. Actually, this one is missing. Yeah, that's better. Alright, then we are done with soldering. Now In order to upload the Pico Probe firmware to the RP2040 on the carrier, we need to use this boot cell button. But since we're only going to upload it once, I'm just going to short it with a tweezer. To download the Pico Probe firmware, you can now go to the GitHub repository for Debug Pro by Raspberry Pi. In the release page, as you can see, there are several different versions of the firmware. For us, since the Pico Debug Carrier runs on the RP2040, we're going to use this one, Debug Probe on Pico.uf2. So download this one. Okay, now short the boot cell button. Remember to short the closer ones and plug in the USB cable. And after you see the storage device on your computer, you can drag and drop the firmware that we just downloaded by replugging in the USB jack. If the firmware is correctly installed, the LED on pin 25 should light up. Now you can just use it as just like other Pico Probe devices, and you can access most of the pins on the target Pico except for pins 0 and 1, which are used for UART communication with Pico Probe itself.